Hello, my name is Juras and I am one of the developers from Redline Games. Today I will show you how to set up a simple framework for a local multiplayer game. As me and my team have been working on Turf Wars, which is a local multiplayer indie game, I thought I would share how I use blueprints to create the spawning system as well as the camera system for our game. I'll be dividing the tutorial into two parts, first one being the spawning and the second one will cover the camera. Let's get to it. Okay, so here I have the default scene that you get when you just press new level and default, and I thought I would start with showing how I set up the character blueprint. So I'll be using the character that I created for Turf Wars as an example throughout the tutorial series, but any character that you have should work just the same. So I'll go into the character blueprint class here that I have, and let me just do this. So this is just the basic movement that I set up quickly so I can test out the characters. And what I thought I would start with is set up some variables and a function within the character blueprint here. So what I'll start with is create an integer variable, call it player int, make it an integer. And this variable will be useful when we want to determine which, when we spawn the players, we'll want to set up which one that spawns so that we can set up different colors and things like that. So that way the new player will have a different look for the character. So I will start by creating a function and call it the spawn function. And I'll be using the player start actors here to determine where I want to spawn each player. So I'll just put out 2 to begin with, and what we'll do is give them some tags, that way we can determine which player to spawn on which player start. So I'll call this one player 0 and this one will be player 1. So now we can go back to the function here, and what we can do is get all actors from class. We'll select the player start, then we'll have to for each loop. So what this will do is basically we'll go through all the player start actors that we have in our level, and we will loop each actor until we find the right one and use that as our spawning location. So it'll make a lot more sense once we're done with this. So let's get the array element and get the player start tag here, and here we will get our player int, so we have something to compare with. So we'll convert this to string and use append on B and use player on A. So now what we can do is convert this to text again, or let's just take this and equal name, and we'll just drag this here. So basically what this will do is it will loop through each of the actors and compare the player start tag with the player int that we set here. So if this is true, I need to branch, use this as a condition. So if these two match up together, what we want to do is basically make a new variable first, call it spawn location, make it a transform, and then we'll just set this here, and if this is all matchups, we'll just use the player start that matched up. We'll use its transform values and set it to our spawn location variable. So get actor transform, and we'll just use this right here. So this should be basically all we need to do. Unless I'm missing something. So, and we'll have to call this function every time we spawn the actors or the characters. So we can just do it in spawn in the begin play here. Just like that. So now we have that set up. Now what we want to do is actually spawn the characters into the world. So how we'll do that is we'll use a game mode blueprint to set all that up. So this was just a test. Let me delete that. And what we'll make is a game mode blueprint class, and we'll call it our local, oh crap, let me just rename this multiplayer game mode, just like that. So now that we created the game mode blueprint, let's open it up, and we'll start by making a new function called spawn players. And since we're having multiple events, or actually no, never mind, let's just do for loop. And what we'll do actually, if we only want to spawn another second player, we wouldn't really need this, but since in case you would want to spawn more than one, let's just add a third one. And now what we can do is write in value of 1 here and a value of 2 on the last index. So basically the first player will always already exist by default. So what we want to do is spawn the extra 2 players that we want. That's why we don't write in 0 in here. So that way we can use a function called create player, using this, and use index from here as a controller ID. So this will just create the extra 2 players that we want and give them the appropriate controller ID to be able to control those players. But we still haven't spawned the actual characters that we have set up here in this blueprint. So what we'll do here now is, after this for loop has been completed, it has looped 2 times, we'll use the completed node here, and we'll use another for loop. And this time what we'll do is we'll use the 0 here and the 2 here. So we want this for loop to loop 3 times, and I'll explain soon why. So once we've done that, what we want to do is we want to spawn actor from class, and now we'll use our character blueprint that we have created before, gangster character. And what we want to do, sometimes the spawning might not work properly, since we're using this function here. We want to spawn, firstly we want to spawn the characters somewhere in the world, so that they can, once they're spawned in the world somewhere, they can look through this and they're like, oh, okay, so this is my spawn location. Which actually what we want to do, I think I missed something, we want to use set actor transform. So what this will do is basically through this blueprint will spawn in the characters into the world, and we can just use a custom transform, make transform, and so that they don't fall through the world or something, we just make sure that the spawn location in the Z value is something like 2000. So now what we can do is go back here and just use teleport on this node right here. That way now we'll spawn the players into the world and they will run this function and determine where they have to spawn. Basically pretty simple. So once we've done this part, what we want to do is actually let's make sure that this variable is editable. That way this should pop up here. Spawn. Wait, we should have this variable appear in here. So let me just check real quick. Okay, so what we want to do is just check in this expose on spawn checkbox on your player int variable. That way when we use spawn actor from class, we can expose this variable right here. So now what we can do is use this index as player int. That way we set up the proper indexes on this variable, which will make sure that the extra players that created get their correct player int values in this blueprint right here. So once we've done that, what we can do is use the processes. Actually, we need to also get player controller from this and use the possess function here, and we'll use these actors that we spawn, the character blueprints, as pawns. That way the new players that just connected to the game will possess these specific characters. So that should be pretty much it for this part. It's fairly simple. So what we'll do is add some comments. Create extra players, or add extra players to the game. And what we'll do here is spawn character actors and possess. Yes. So if we look now, let's make sure that the level uses our game mode here, and we'll see if anything happens. No, not yet. Right, make sure the default pawn class is our gangster character here, or whatever character blueprint that you're using. Still nothing. Oh right, I forgot. I need to actually spawn function is correct. We need to make sure that we execute our function that we set up on the begin play, otherwise nothing will happen. So now, as you can see, I see the other two players. One thing that will happen if you add extra players, it will actually split your screen. So unless you want that, we can actually, what you have to do is you have to go to the project settings here and make sure that the if you go to maps and modes, I believe, yes, make sure that this checkbox is unchecked. So now when we play, we shouldn't see the extra the split screen. So what I see now is that we have an extra character that we don't want, and that is not supposed to happen. So let me see what we did wrong here. So we create the extra players, 1 to 2. Oh, okay. So wait, maybe we don't actually need this. Okay, so we didn't actually need to have a default pawn here set. We can just, since we already spawned those and possessed them afterwards here, so otherwise it'll spawn an extra character that we don't want. So I believe that the spawning isn't really, the location that they spawn in isn't really set up correctly. So let me just see why that happens. Player 1, okay. So we have 2 player stars that have the same player start tag. So let's make sure this is set to 2 right here. So now, yes, as you can see, we see the other players. So if I get my controllers, I'll see if I can control the second player while controlling the first one. So I'll be back in a second. Okay, so now I have 2 Xbox 360 controllers connected to my computer, and we'll see if it works. So this is the second controller index, and if I use the first one, as you can see, I can run around with using 2 controllers. So this part works. Now what we can do is to something fast is we can make sure that the or make so that the characters use different colors on their shoes to determine which player index it is. That way it's easier to identify. So what we can do is on the set color function that we began before, as I explained, we use our player int variable to do different things. So let's say if it's player 0, we don't really want to do anything since default color will be red. But if we want the second player to be blue, for example, we can use set material on the mesh here, and we'll use the shoe blue, and I believe the index is the 0. Okay, so now if I do this on the green one, we can set this to green. So now if I press play, oh right, okay, we have to actually execute the function at the beginning. So set color. So now if I press play, as you can see, the player, this is the control ID 2, and the player has blue shoes. And if I go to the third player, he has green shoes. So that way you can easily differentiate the different players from each other. So I believe this is it for the part 1. As you can see, we're only using the first person camera, or the camera from the player 1, which we don't want. We want to have a camera that maybe looks on the whole level and each player can see everything the same. So in the next part I will show how to set up a camera system that will basically calculate the distance between all the players that exist and take the shortest distance between 2 players and use that as a guide to zoom in or out, and it will also follow the players as they go left or right. So yeah, this is part 1. If you want to support me, or if you like the tutorial and you want to support the channel, you can follow our game Turfwars on our social medias that I will link in the description. The game will be released on Steam real soon, so if you want to check that out, you can do so. There's also a free demo if you want to maybe test the game with your friends. Feel free to do so. And yeah, I will see you guys in part 2.